right, thank you everybody for coming. I'm Jim Warner, Transportation Planner with MAPA. I think I know most of you here. We do have some new faces and it's like 9 or 10 folks on the call outside. So I'd like to go ahead and just get started with a quick round of introductions. If you just say who you are and where you're from, I'll let you start.
Tim Adams with WSP. I am the project lead on the consultant side.
Lindsay Button, MAPA. I am transportation planner working on the Safe Streets project.
Owen Suki, I'm the GIS coordinator for MAPA. I'm handling a lot of the data logistics.
Doug Hagan, City of Valley, Public Works Superintendent.
Julie Harris of Blackhawk, Nebraska.
Nicholas Sullivan, the National Safety Council.
Andy Wick, City of West Traffic.
John Mark, HDR on the consulting.
Todd Pitzer, North County.
Shirley Wade, Safe Omaha Street.
Sherry Douglas.
Carlos Morales, transportation planner over at MAPA,
You're
overseeing.
I had no idea you were a planner, Lynn.
Just in case.
I'm Kimara Snipes, One Omaha.
And then online we have Travis Hahn with Iowa DOT, Alex Evans, with City of Papillion, Larry Grant with Iowa DOT, Leland Jacobson, Mark Patton with the Creighton Reach Program, Sarah Moulton with Metro Transit, Vicky Quates Ferris, Yunwoo Nam with UNL, and someone G4 Joe. Not sure. Let us know.
Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, G for Joe.
Okay,
The G is Gabriel.
Oh, perfect.
great. Thank you all for attending online as well. I'm gonna go through a couple slides real quick and then I'll turn it over to Tim. So we'll look at what we're gonna talk about today. I'm gonna talk briefly. This meeting really was chosen to kick off our community survey. We'll talk through some more details there, but this is getting input from the community on safety issues that they've experienced. It's a location-based survey that we'll go through. It's gonna feed kind of our traditional public input, but it's also gonna go into our systemic safety portion of the high injury network as well. So all good data, we'll use it to get an understanding of how the public feels about our roadways, but also it's gonna add to the rigor, I guess, of our high injury network itself. We'll go through probably in great detail, the community crash surveys. And then we'll talk about the high injury network status. Okay, so this is the SS4A community input survey, hot off the press. We'll share this on our website as well, but if you'd like to take a look from the QR code. We're really looking for this group and other groups to share this with people that you work with to make sure that we get a good broad input. So we're excited about the tool. It works well on phone, it works on your computer. So happy to take any feedback, but we think it should be a pretty user-friendly survey. When we do talk about community engagement, where we're going to people and people come to us, we'll have a paper version of this as well, so people can give us input that way as well. And then really quickly, where are we at? We're a good 5 months into the study already. This is the second meeting of the MAPA Safety Committee. We'll be presenting similar material to our Transportation Technical Advisory Committee in 2 weeks. And that kind of sets this baseline for where we're at in planning. We'll do a lot of community outreach and engagement focused this summer, and then kind of get into some phases further on. So the next time this group would look to meet would be in September. And you should, generally those of you that have been on our distribution, you should have that in your calendar. And if not, we'll definitely make sure you'll see the same kind of invites that came from MAPA for that event as well. And then finally, this is a preview of a couple locations that we're going to go to. Listed on the left is what work we have scoped for the consultants to take on. But we're excited to say there's effort that the consultants are going to do, and then we're working with some community partner organizations to add on to that and to really get into communities where we've had difficulties doing outreach in the past. So we're excited about that as well, and we'll provide more information as those are scheduled. All right, I'm done. Thank you very much.
So I guess I'll stand up. It's a long table. So we wanted to go over, so we have 2 teams working together, and this is like Jim said, hot off the press data analysis. So we want to give you a preview really to get the conversation going on one of the pillars of the Safe Streets for All is data driven. So taking the engagement and everything we do, hearing more people feel most unsafe, but also looking at the crash data. And there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of crash points that we are looking at, and we're taking that to influence the recommendations that come out of this. Not only are we looking at crashes and where they happen, but who they happen to, what characteristics those are, and that's all going to come into play so that we can direct our limited time and resources to addressing the problem. So, add an overview. We're looking at 2018 to 2022 crash data. So 5 years of crash data for the entire Napa region, which for anyone that is new, we are looking at Douglas, Sarpy County, as well as the incorporated Iowa cities of Council Bluffs, Carter Lake, McClellan, and Crescent. Thank you. I think it's the same one. So during that 5-year time period, in these areas, we've had over 80,000 crashes total that have been reported to police that we're able to measure. During that time, there's been 300 fatalities and over 2,000 serious injuries. And maybe I've been in these conversations, probably already know, but some don't. Why do we just look at fatalities and serious injuries? Because there's also 3 other categories of crashes, which are minor injuries and essentially moderate, as well as property damage only. So everyone walked away just fine, right? But we only look at serious injuries and fatalities because that's what we care about driving down. Anyone would take the trade-off, I would hope, of 10 property damage only crashes, and you walk away from the crash to get rid of 1 fatality, right? So that's the trade-off we're making, and because the solutions look different, if we look at fatalities only, and the types of things that we can do to eliminate fatalities are different if we are looking at all crashes. So that's what's important, is to save lives. And then why we look at serious injuries is because a lot of times it's just chance that a serious injury didn't happen to be a fatality. And a serious injury also is when police classify that, when departments have to, they most often follow up if someone goes to the hospital. The serious injury is categorized as one if there are lifelong consequences from the event, right? Physical or mental. So someone lost a limb, someone has a traumatic brain injury, right? Those kinds of things. So those are that we want to eliminate both of those. And you can see it's been staying pretty steady with slightly going down. So this is an overall good trend, but we really, our goal is to accelerate this to 0 of our goal in 2040. Yeah. What does this look like nationally and as well as to the state? So this line, there's this graphic here. On the left is the states, so Iowa and Nebraska, so Iowa in green, Nebraska in orange, and Napa, and then we have another okay. And then we have another scale to show the nation. And this is fatalities per year. So you can see that if the Napa region comparatively, and I would just pay attention to the trends of the states where you can see that national fatalities have dropped down in that time period, but a lot of these states have stayed steady. Crashing overview, if we look at this again for serious injuries, kind of the same relationships with ups and downs, but really staying steady overall. So before I get really into a lot of this data, I want to kind of talk about the data gaps, and I'm just going to touch on this briefly. We have a more technical committee where we'll get into this, but there's a lot of things that we're still working on is what I want to get at. And we have really good coverage on crash data, functional classification of our roadways, and the posted speed in our region. But we have a lot of room for improvement, and this might come through some of our recommendations where we're missing a lot of roadway characteristic data where we can make relationships between the fatalities that we're seeing and the characteristics of the roadway in order to make recommendations. the better our data can become, the better our recommendations can also follow. And so this is something that we are gonna absolutely incorporate into our recommendations, because this is gonna be an ongoing process, so the plan can continue to be updated as we get better data, as we start implementing. And Meyer, attributes are a federal, if you see that acronym ever, it's just a federal acronym for the type of data that we're looking at. So. Okay, so getting into the data a little bit, crash types. I mean, these next two slides are kind of in the weeds a little bit more, and then I want to kind of take a step back. I want you to know that we're looking at things at a very engineering, very specific level, and then we're taking a step back on how we communicate that and what we can do about solutions. But overall, single vehicle and angle crashes are our region's top fatal and serious injury types. What that comes down to is how, right, I mean, the biggest things that lead to a serious or fatal injury are speed and angle, right? It's why a lot of countermeasures like roundabouts work really well. You can't go, it's hard to go fast in a roundabout, and it eliminates all right angle crashes, right? Those are the ones that cause fatalities. And so when you think about red light running, what makes which we'll give you the data, unfortunately not in this presentation because it's preliminary, but we've seen around the country, red light running is really, really dangerous behavior because you're hitting that gas and you're coming at someone either head on or at a right angle. And so this is no surprise here that angle and the single vehicle, especially single vehicle crashes, especially in our rural areas, big problem. So, and then when we start looking at modes, right now this is. We break this down on our modes, and this is broken down SUVs and vans. We're going to kind of combine that in the next slide. But if you look at the small vehicles, I'm going to point this out. Small vehicles are motorcycles, ATVs, mopeds. Look at that giant disproportion between all crashes is in orange of percent and versus KA crashes. I'm going to show you that over here. So the small vehicles here, this bar chart. So what the next graphics I'm going to show you are what's called representation ratios. So what we look at is we look at the proportion of fatal and serious injury crashes over the proportion of the total volume. So we see that, so i.e. small vehicles, motorcyclists are 7 times more likely to be killed or seriously injured when they get into a crash compared to the baseline. So that's what you look at it. Whereas general motor vehicles, and I want to show this graphic over here. That's our largest quantity, right? We have over 100,000 of those crashes happening. But proportionally, they're less likely to result when they get into a crash. They're less likely to result in a fatal or serious injury when we look at these different modes. So bicyclists, close to 4 times more likely to result in a fatal and serious injury. And then pedestrians are right there with motorcyclists. And a lot of times we group bicyclists, pedestrians, and a lot of times motorcyclists in our vulnerable road user group, because those are the solutions that we look at to address those users are very different, right? So
Tim, we have a question
Yeah.
from Vicky. Is there a reason why motorcycles are integrated with small vehicles rather than having their own category?
I think it's reporting and yeah, it's a reporting thing between integration between Nebraska and Iowa data, but we could get a more full answer on that. Any other questions? Pause me at any time, by the way. I want the bad presentations where I'm talking all the time. So,
Yeah, I think you make a good point, Tim, that we are working with 2 different states' data sets, both in the crash data, how they look at things, and there are some pretty significant differences. There are some standardized reporting rules kind of for fatalities in particular, the fatality analysis of reporting system, but there's a lot of data that's being offered from both states that's different enough that what the team is trying to do is bring it together so that we can talk apples to apples.
Yep. So the next three charts, I wanna look at roadway characteristics of what we have so far, and one of those is lighting. And now, some of these won't be as, like, 7-to-1 is a huge disproportion, right? Now, some of these are so important, this is 40% greater than the average of unlit areas are 30 to 40% more likely to result in a fatal or serious injury. So using stats, now we can take that and look at, how are we setting up our lighting, especially in areas where people are walking at night, business districts. When we look at roadways, this trend is consistent across the country. High capacity roadways have a disproportionate amount of the crashes, of fatal and serious injury crashes compared to local roadways, right? Or 2-lane through streets. So this is, I'm sorry, I don't have a label in here. It says over there through, but these are the number of through lanes on a roadway. So 2 lanes being, right, 1 lane in each direction, 4 lanes, 2 and 2, either divided or not. This doesn't parse through that, just looks at all 4 lane roadways, and then 6+. And this includes our expressways as well in here. So I think the most lanes we have in any section is 12, and that's on I-80 for a portion. But any 6+ true lane roadway. And these are a lot of arterials, highways, expressways in that category there. Any surprise on that? No?
Not surprised at all.
It would seem to summarize, that it would align with speed, correct?
A lot of times. So it's interesting, and I hope they get into this. We will eventually, we're gonna parse out expressways, because if you look at national data, local arterial roadways are much more dangerous than interstate systems. Because we've designed those interstates to be controlled access, to have large clearance areas. And so when we do design our roadways for high speeds, we can make them really safe. So yeah, but I hope to parse into that so that we can tease that out in the map of region, and specifically for localities as well.
Tim, does this align with, because you had shown nationwide how we rank compared to other places in the nation, so is this nationally the same, or is it just how people drive in this area on these interstates?
So what I was talking about, that's I've seen that on a national level. In our data analysis, I hope to get into this region on those specific questions.
Oh, I thought you were just saying the expressway wouldn't be included in it, but you're saying you don't know how it aligns. I must be misunderstanding.
Sorry.
Is this a trend? Because what we learned in Vision Zero was that like the 4 lanes or the sometimes interior roads were worse, and then
Yeah.
depending on speed, it was like 35 to 45 was highest or something.
Yep.
So that, but what I'm asking, and maybe you already answered and I didn't understand, nationally, is this normal for 6+ through lanes to be 9 times more deadly? Or is it just how people drive in this area? And just how our.
I don't think, I can't say for certain, because we haven't gotten that much into the data analysis.
Oh,
Essentially
okay.
preview, but I would guess the drivers in Omaha or the Omaha area region are not abnormal on the nation,
Okay.
unless you're in New Jersey, of course.
New Jersey is much, my partner's from New Jersey, don't forget, I mean, there's more enforcement here. And there's differences, they have more Jersey barriers, so.
Oh,
Don't just go trashing it, let's get the.
I meant no.
Now I gotta go research Jersey. Are you?
So you're right, though, in asking that question. There are 2 things that the team's gonna continue to look at. That's what is that makeup of roadway types and speed limits. We have a wide range of roadways. We have some 6-lane roadways that are 40 miles an hour. And they have very different access controls than other roadways that may have a higher speed, just because of how they've been built. And a lot of them, maybe being old highways that become urbanized. So I think there's a lot more to look at. The other thing we hope to do is actually look at measured speed. So look at what are people driving on that road as opposed to what that speed limit is.
Yeah, for sure.
Cumming Street.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
You know me, Tim, I had that.
No, no, absolutely. So now, all the following slides are a lot of behavioral characteristics, attributes of either mainly attributes of the drivers or those involved in the crash or the victims. So impairment, although less than 5% of crashes involved alcohol, they were 5 times more likely to result in a fatal or serious injury crash, right? So that means they're 5% of the crashes, but they're 20% of the people dying and getting seriously injured. And there is a really big jump. I don't think I have the slide here, but there's a really big jump in the serious injury comparison to fatality, whereas alcohol is even more if you just look at just fatalities. Huge correlation. This will be an interesting area that we need to address, I think, as a group too, and maybe I would enjoy the conversation about how we treat alcohol recommendations as far as countermeasures, right, and what we can do to address this problem, because a lot of times it's education. And then when you look at a lot of the research, the effectiveness per dollar is a lot of times not there. And so looking at how we can be most effective, I think, yeah, I want to open the door to that conversation maybe.
I do know in Vision Zero on the alcohol committee, they talked, and none of this came to fruition, but they talked a lot about the criminal justice system and how that was a problem, that they were saying that people would have these crashes but then it would get sealed down or something. And so I don't know, what reach we have, but that was a major player, it sounded like, was how people are prosecuted and then how they continue to go out and drive.
Mhm.
So that's just something to think about.
Yeah, the relation to repeat offenders, yeah.
Well, I also think about the people who drink, who never go to jail, right? So, I mean, seriously, you have a lot of functioning alcoholics. And so for me, it's like the behavioral health piece, like, why don't we pull people like that into the conversation who may have suggestions and thoughts around how to address it? Because we were just talking, a lot of behavior that I see around traffic is behaviors. And so that's kind of where my mind goes.
So before we go to the next slide quick, Leland had a question. Is there data on each mode of transportation versus the cost or amount of required safety equipment on the vehicles? So for example, cost of safety equipment to vehicle cost.
Oh. That's a really interesting question. I'm sure there is. It's not something I don't believe our data team's looking at, and that'd be very NHTSA intent. So there is, maybe speaking to that, Leland, on the safety equipment thing, NHTSA just standardized quite a few safety, like blindside detection and a couple of those other things with equipment, the higher costs that drive into, like, if you're gonna get the premium package, right? They made a requirement in the next 5 years that a lot of these safety systems have to be in place. In a 5-year window, they have to become standard, which is really great to see. And I guess along those lines, those are really tough recommendations to make at our level. But it's something that, I mean, honestly, we can to say like, hey, our senators should be advocating for this, or if we send someone to wherever, we need to bring this up, that this is important to us, and around the country, we say that, but that drives up the price, and because we see relationships, and we don't have, I'm excited that the next one, when we get a lot more data, we look at disadvantaged communities, and we see that communities in disadvantaged areas, socioeconomic status, have to make choices between their vehicles and maintenance, as well as how new they are. They don't have those safety features. So there's definitely a relationship in the research. But it's not something we're gonna parse out probably regionally.
Great, thank you.
Occupant restraint, this is, I have a later slide on this one too, that's, a little eye popping, we know that restraint, nothing new. If you're unrestrained, that much more likely if you get into a crash to result in a serious injury or fatality. And on a later slide, we're gonna talk about the volume of injuries and fatalities that happen due to restraints, especially if they are children, and especially if there's multiple. It just becomes a multiplier of chances that there's gonna be a fatality involved. Any thoughts on what we could do on restraints though? When we start thinking about countermeasures and recommendations for the region? This is kind of like alcohol, though it's hard to get after sometimes.
I think geographically and geospatially, like. I'm kind of curious to see some of this unrestrained versus
Yeah.
restrained, like within the urban core versus outside the urban core. I know on the rural parts of the region, like this is a bigger problem. And as a state for home, the unrestrained is still one of the bigger concerns. If I remember some of the numbers I've seen, but.
It's pretty difficult though, because Nebraska has secondary enforcement law for Stevens, so there's nothing we can do about it for adults. So if an adult drives passives unrestrained, they have to commit a primary violation first before we can stop them. So it's been tried for years and years to get moved primary, and down when Nebraska will remove it, so.
I would say that, the trend, there was an article posted last week, I believe, showing that in Nebraska, it's getting worse. There's more unrestrained crashes. And when you think back to the amount of click it or ticket, I mean, if you think back to the amount of money spent on campaigns to get people to wear their seatbelts. And we all know, everybody knows you have to wear your, I mean, that's a cultural thing. You know you're supposed to wear it, you make a conscious decision not to wear it. The amount of money we've spent on trying to get people to wear their seatbelts, and it's not working, quite frankly. In fact, things are getting worse. So is this a good, I'm not at all saying we should not be encouraging people to wear their seatbelts, that's not what I'm saying, but what I am saying is, if we were to evaluate the amount, the programs and the amount of money spent on this particular issue, and maybe to some extent the drinking and driving issue, how effective really is it? And is that money better spent in other ways somehow? This is I don't know, extension question, I guess, but, I don't know, I'm skeptical that trying to focus on seatbelt restraints in general is really gonna move the needle because of everything we've been trying, and it's just getting worse. I'll end my rant there.
What's Iowa's law? Is it different than Nebraska's?
I don't know.
I believe it's still secondary.
It's secondary, so I'm trying to see.
So if we did make it a primary offense, what percentage of an officer's time is gonna be just pulling over people without seatbelts?
Yeah, let's not do that.
It's still like it's.
Iowa is a primary offense.
Primary in Iowa?
Yes.
Thanks,
It's
Ray.
just like any speeding or any violation, it's not a required stop, but they just give us more tools to enforce it. Nebraska also went backwards and removed the helmet laws too.
Yeah, we're not gonna.
Over 21 years of age, you get under 21, you have to wear it, but over 21 is optional now.
And would you say that how likely is a person to really continue to start then wearing their seatbelt once you pull them over and give them a ticket? Probably
So
not.
they're gonna slow down the speeding. so-
Yeah, exactly. So these are all questions I have researched.
Tim, could you talk about that slide a little bit? There's been some discussion down at this end of the table. So what is the blue line that one represent? It says 1.7 times likely to result in fatal compared to the 0.56. So is that per?
No, so this is the 1.0 represents the average, right? So like, think of it like your 1.0 times as likely as blank, right? So the 1.7 is showing it's saying that when we look at an unrestrained, if they get into a crash, what is the probability of that crash resulting in a fatal or serious injury? And then we look at the data and we take the proportion of fatal and serious injury crashes divided by the proportion of the total.
All
That
crashes.
is what gets us the 1.7. So they're 1.7 times more likely if you're unrestrained in a crash than the average. The baseline is 1, right? It's
So,
just-
so is one just, fatal and serious over total crashes?
Yeah, yes, so that would be proportionally the same. It'd be like saying like,
Okay, so it's fatal and serious injuries over total crashes, and then you take fatal and serious injuries of unrestrained and compare those two numbers.
Okay,
does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, it does.
and the other number was less than 1 because it includes non-vehicle passengers, so to.
And Vicky also has another question asking if, it basically gets to this in a little bit over here, if the data is broken out by age and gender.
Yes, it is. And
We have some engineers in the room, y'all. Don't be afraid to show your math. I'm looking at Todd to check our
I
math.
might, yeah, we can get to this right now, so.
Just before we get too far away, Larry actually had a comment earlier on the impaired drivers as well, just to remember that impaired drivers are also impaired by drugs, legal and illegal. So, and I think that's something else that our data team's gonna be looking at as
Yeah,
well.
we have that broken out and, yes. So, and I will note with the unrestrained, Nebraska, like we're saying, Nebraska is getting worse. In the most recent national data, they have to do, the state has to do, counts. They put people out in roadways across the state. And they look at the person driving, if they're restrained or not. And everyone in the nation is required to do this, to see what percentage of drivers in your state have restraint usage. And we're third worst in the country as a state, so. It's a big problem. It's a much larger problem in rural areas. So, yeah, and so this is something too, what Carlos said, that getting all this data plotted on a map to see where restraint use is the worst. It's like, if we do broad educational efforts, maybe that's not the greatest use of resources. But if we focus in on this one community, really struggles with it. Right, so.
Another question from Leland, is distracted considered impaired?
Distracted, not in our data right now, but we have that data. But distracted driving is really tough. The officers in the room can probably talk to how distracted driving is really hard to enforce as well as to measure. Yeah.
It's, as Nebraska law, you can be on telephone while driving, but you can't be using the digital side of telephone. So for us to drive past somebody and determine if they're holding the phone and talking to speakerphone versus searching Google's hard thing.
And that's just secondary also.
Yes.
And that's updated on your new crash forms, isn't it? That's like a new, because we didn't used to have as much data on it, I
Yeah,
think, and now we're gonna
The
have
federal requirements
more
to have
data.
data points on there for that.
And if my phone is connected to my CarPlay and I'm using the entertainment dashboard, I'm trying to use my phone.
Yeah.
So
You're right.
I don't know why.
It still looks at that as a cell phone use, it is the data going through a cell phone.
Gotcha.
So.
Interesting.
And that's been controversial on reporting for years, because if you get in a crash, are you going to voluntarily say, well, yes, I was on my phone, and be honest and put that down, or are you gonna say, I swerved to miss a dog? Because the consequences are different, people know that, so we're not sure we're getting accurate reporting, even though it's available on the data forms, we're not. I mean, it comes down to people's honesty in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and so a lot of times, everyone's suspecting it's underreported.
Yes.
And so, but, it's hard to get after something if we can't measure it, right? You know, so if we can measure it, going back to our, what's good, what needs work and what we don't have for data, but we can't measure it, we can't get after it a lot of times. We can only go by feel. And this is actionable, right? You know, so if we have the data on it, if we can see these proportions, we can see it, we can act on it. So it's really exciting in the next years that we're gonna get that new reporting data.
And this one's an interesting one too, distracted or what have you, because as cars get smarter, when you have more driver aids, maybe the car can help correct. So that could be that thing that keeps a crash from being fatal or serious injury as opposed to just focusing on the driver, changing behavior.
Speeds and aggressive driving. So there's a lot going on here, but let's point out the couple of the big ones here. So crashes exceeding the speed limit are on average 7 times more likely to result in a fatal or serious injury crash. You can see right here. So these are a lot of the attributes that when reporting the crash and seeing what led to it, that's what all of these are, right? Is what we were just previously maybe touching on, is when police officer responds, they can say that if they failed to yield the right of way, disregarded traffic control device, so, just flew through the stop sign. But speeding, huge problem. As well as this one is wrong side or wrong way driving 4 times more likely to result in a fatal or serious injury crash. And then that can be like solutions, like a lot of times when I look at that, I'm like, what are you supposed to do about that, right? But maybe it's a signing issue, especially if once we put this on a map and we see, oh, all these crashes are happening at the interchange of 156th and Dodge. Maybe we don't have wrong way signs right there, right? So then all of a sudden we can get after it. Aggressive or erratic driving. We have a slide a little bit later getting into that one more. But what's also important, I'm not pointing these out, is the ones that are low. Like follow too closely, only 0.34. So they're compared to the average, they are 67% less likely to result. So it's like they're not an area that we need to focus on. So it kind of hones in our vision on the things that are the problems, right? So you can kind of eliminate the noise. Not to say it's not important, like it should, we don't want that. No surprises?
I imagine if you're following too closely, then the speed and the distance aren't much of a factor, but property damage ones I bet are a lot higher. Minor
Yeah.
injury. Yeah.
Yep, and this is only fatal and serious injury, right? Yeah. Yep.
If you look at the ones that stand out here, it ties to the series of fatal because of the type of accident that comes from speed. We all know speed results in higher injuries and death. Wrong side, that's a head-on crash. We all know how dangerous those are. And aggressive or erratic driving. So that there's your 3 top ones and leading directly to your serious injury and death because of the types of crashes.
We look at age, anyone over 65 in the room?
Bold ass bet, sir.
Safe driver here. You're gonna be a passenger to anybody in the room.
I'll drive Danny home after this.
Drive it, Dan. But this is consistent across the country, and young drivers 40% more likely. And this is group 14 to 24 mainly because of different reporting standards between Nebraska and Iowa, but we're able to get into I should not back up and say, but I want to add that we have not only our TTAC technical advisory committee that we'll kind of get into a lot more of the engineering details, but we also have breakout meetings with local leaders, and some of you are in this room who are local leaders, and we're going to talk about individual communities, right? I say that because I was talking about Nebraska and Iowa, and when we get to parse it out, and that's when we're going to get to parse it out for your community and look at the data specifically that's going on in Valley or what's going on in Council Bluffs, and then we'll get to see what's, these charts might look a little different for you, and so your recommendations might look a little different as well. But the 14 to 24, I was going to say that it's even more pronounced when we look at 14 to 17. It goes up even more. So, if we can get at young drivers, there has been research that young drivers who go through driver's education much less likely to get into crashes in general. And so,
Is it hard for you to find out, data like in earlier years? Because we had less driver education for younger people, and I'd be curious if there was a correlation, like between, if we could see that. I know data is hard to get, but we have, we don't have drivers in schools anymore and things like that. It would be interesting to see if that's correlated. Because there are some training is different than like an educational
Yeah.
campaign. So it would be interesting to see if
Yeah.
that flushes out.
as a part of this effort, we don't have that data, but at a national level, they've looked at things like that, in relationship to the educational component and maybe not at like a specific timestamp for most drivers that fell off the map from schools. But yeah, we just know there's a direct relationship between those classes and education. So getting those characteristics, looking at both age and sex. This is consistent. We just talked about age with, there's a lot going on here, but it's the top one is showing licensed drivers. And so maybe I'll just point out. So, licensed drivers, 15% of all licensed drivers, 16% essentially are in that group for 2024, but they make up 21% of the crashes, and then about the same ratio of 22% of fatal. KA is fatal and serious injury, K being the highest injury. That's why we use in engineering. So KA means fatal and serious injury. And if we look over here, where you can see those stats the same there, disproportionate, like 65 plus, they make up 22%, but only 9% of fatal and serious injury crashes, right? So that's that proportion that we're talking about. And then male drivers, right around, they're just slightly above average, 50% more, but. And this is primarily due, this disproportionate, I mean, there's been a lot of psychology studies, then just more aggressive tendencies, more reckless driving, drinking behaviors, a lot of things that lead into that. But. So. Thoughts?
Probably will never capture the characteristics of those individuals that cause accidents.
Mm.
And we know there's some stereotypes associated with some of it, but I'm a senior, but I've seen some seniors that because of their behavior, they cause accidents. But anyway, that's not anything we'll probably ever look at, but you kind of know what's out there.
Yes.
I'm gonna do another plug though for the survey that we have out. And this is why we want to get into so many hands, is that we want people to report this, and if there is a concern, and then we're gonna go all this is our dots on the map, right? This is with the data we have, but things like this, that take that survey 10 times, if this is a safety concern here, and it's right outside the St. Joseph Villa on 10th Street, then we need to talk about that. Maybe there's something we can do, so. But yeah, absolutely, things that go unreported.
So one thing that the data team has taken a look at, we're gonna get ambulance data, basically emergency services data on crashes, and we do know there's also a lost reporting where they're we're not matching up those injuries from crashes to the total number of crashes altogether. So hopefully that will kind of show us something that we haven't looked at traditionally, and definitely not done it at our regional level.
No.
There we go. Driver behavior. So this is kind of very in-depth, a lot going on, but basically, looking at the behavioral characteristics of the driver. So from where we look at under the influence, distracted, fatigue, illness, emotional. I didn't know this is a category that we had, honestly. Physical impairment, aggressive, erratic, and seeing the proportion of percentage of all crashes, disproportionate there, for aggressive driving. 79% of aggressive or erratic driving within crashes for male. Kind of leading to that last point we're talking about. And then same thing with DUI, and this one's really interesting, well, in 25 to 65. It's a big age range, and we're gonna try to dive into maybe, I don't even geographically, but more of that narrow range. So just in summary, some of these behavioral characteristics, unrestrained adults, big problem. So it's almost double, right, of 38% of all crashes have been unrestrained adult, 65% of all KA crashes, right? That's that proportion, 65% unrestrained. What do we do? Educational efforts, maybe not. We've been doing that for decades, right? So. 65 plus, child occupants, almost double for the Uvalde KA crash. And this one, unrestrained child. 20, so this is, I'll read it with that. It's involved in 25% of child occupant crashes. 40, close to 50% of child occupant, unrestrained child occupants. If you get in a crash, result in a fatal or serious injury. So, right? So if there's an unrestrained child and they get into a crash, 50% likelihood to serious injury, or so that's lifelong injury to the child, or a chance of fatality. I'll add too, we don't have the data here, but I'm not excited to get it, but we're gonna talk about with restraint is occupant protection overall as the category. And motorcyclists, we were talking about earlier, and I've done a presentation or two on this, and Missouri had a helmet law just like we did, and they repealed theirs in 2018, 2019. And they did a 3-year study, before after study, looking at their fatality rates for motorcyclists to before their helmet law was repealed, and the 3 years post. They saw a 40% jump in fatality rate for motorcyclists.
For the unrestrained children, I mean, I've seen statistics that talk about how many children are not properly restrained. So how does improperly restrained go into restrained or unrestrained?
I don't know how the reporting goes with improper, if anyone else in the room maybe does.
Most people I see there is not properly restraining or is unrestrained. Thank you. So.
Okay.
That's just for ours, because if they're not properly restrained, they're not restrained.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
What are the examples of improper restraint use?
Look, if they're in a car seat, if it's reaction loose, and a lot of parents put their kids in a seat and the kids will not restrain themselves, so, or loosen them, so that's primarily. I mean, that's still a parent responsibility, make sure their kids are in there, whatnot, or a parent transporting a couple extra kids and not having the problematic car seats in there.
Just an adult question, like what if they're like, it's like an improperly sized booster seat and things like that, right?
Because they're still weighted in the height of for the individual child, so.
Thank you.
It's good. Maybe before I can go into the Hydra preview, which you just previewed. But any other questions on the data? Yes, questions will ask it. So what this is all leading to, and this is.
I actually have one.
Yes, Carlos, I didn't see you.
No, before the high injury, before the
Take it back.
big reveal. Sorry. Any chance we could see the victim file? So we looked at the driver characteristics. I think the other characteristics of who and whom are getting hurt are also a little revealing, right? My assumption and my gut tells me that on the victim file, right, on the pedestrian side, people in more vulnerable situations, younger and older, are more likely to be in a fatal, right? Like, if you're, so just wondering if we're gonna dig into that later on the victim
Absolutely.
side.
So what they pulled from was a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, and they highlighted yellow the big things that we wanted to talk about today. So yeah, there's a very wide range of characteristics, both driver, vehicle, and person that's injured.
And I'll add, all the data you saw is person data. So it's if the driver survives, but an occupant dies, it was involved in this analysis, right? So, but yeah. So, through this data analysis is the high injury network. So basically this is big problem. Hundreds of people dying, thousands of people being seriously injured. If we look at a region, how do we prioritize our resources? Where are the hotspot? Many people have seen over the years hotspot maps that it's, you know, it's this big red area, it goes to yellow. But this is getting at the exact streets and intersections that have the worst KA crashes, the fatal serious injuries. So our data team very much want to say that this is a draft, that we're still working through it as we keep processing the data and looking more into it, but it's spread out across the region, as you can see.
What years are we looking at?
2018 to 2022.
Yeah, and again, as it says at the top, this is only where those fatal or serious injury crashes have occurred. There's definitely not been a corridor analysis, an intersection analysis. It's a statement of fact at this point. So what will come out of that will be much more refined. That the high injury network that we take action against, of course, will be based upon this crash that has occurred, as well as that systemic analysis, which says which roadways could be more likely to have those crashes that could be fatal or serious.
And I'll exactly to Jim's point, is this is only historic data, so it's just reactive to what's going on. But if we take what Jim is saying, we take all our data we know. So let me go back to like the roads, for example. So this one, for example, if we have on our roadway characteristics that this is an unlit roadway, we can now give it a factor of, instead of just one, like every road would have, right? It's just a road. We can give it a bump up that if you're unlit, you get a score of 1.4, right? And we can take into effect all these characteristics that we were analyzing here and many more to create that predictive analytics. So we can then get a map that's not looking historically, but we can say, we know what the built environment is, and we know what the unsafe characteristics of a roadway look like if there's a lack of a median, like four lane, undivided, right? High characteristic, it's gonna have like a 3.5, pretend, or something, so then we can get that scoring. Now we can predict where fatal and serious injuries are gonna happen, so they don't have to wait. Okay. So, that's kind of all I had, guys, so. Or discussion.
I just tested out the QR code and that does take you to this link of the high energy network draft map. If anybody is actually interested in checking out any of the details of this data.
So what will be taken to community leader groups will be kind of that initial results of that community survey, so they can understand what people who live or maybe visit or travel through each jurisdiction. A more detailed analysis of this high injury network, so they'll get to take a look at and really kind of starting a list of here's things that we think could be possible improvements. Can you please tell us things that you want to work on? But all this is meant to be very interactive. I mean, a lot of the same faces here in the room from the Omaha Vision Zero. Our goal is to get to a place where we're continuing the work when they're done and having that good baseline to start from. So I guess I'll start with, go ahead.
Well, if you're gonna start, I had a question for the group.
Please.
So based on this data, we started talking about what would be useful, right? We talked about geospatial data, looking at where the unrestrained are. Your communities, your areas of expertise, your groups, if you're helping push a message, what data would be useful for you to use? What can I bring back to our data team and say, we need to look at this and we need to show this? I'm really curious if anyone has any ideas. I wish I could see this on a map or this chart. Yeah,
Curious, like what the quantifiable difference is if like there's places where response time by emergency responders, let's say you cut it, we knew that by cutting emergency responder time on scene by 50%, does that decrease in any significant amount fatality? I don't know what that number looks like in significant amount. I don't know if that's.
I know on a national level it is. We see relationships between faster, they even have like a logarithmic graph per minute of response time sooner, the much likelier it is surviving a serious crash, right? But to what you're saying, I think is really interesting. I haven't seen is if we can map, say, quote, travel times from a fire station and see how that maybe overlays with our data.
Well, it's not just travel time, it's also staffing and.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that go into response time, but travel time. is
You
part
have some
of it.
data you can throw our way.
I'm speak to it, but it's just something
Yeah,
I'm curious about
absolutely.
as cities, municipalities look at deploying stations, staffing and all that stuff.
Can't we give them that survey? Like,
What's that?
we should target emergency responders with the community engagement survey, because they would be the.
Yeah. I agree. So that emergency services data we will get will be more generalized. We wouldn't be able to say this ended up idling in a fatality or a serious injury. So we would have that data for fatalities that talks about that medical response time. That's of course just a very small subset, but NEMSIS, that kind of that data set that we're pulling from there is some really recent reporting that does show just what you're talking about, which is that travel time. And the number that they said, which was startling me, 40% of fatalities, the person that passed away was alive when the emergency services responded to the crash. So, you know, if we want to find things that we can fix, that right there is, now, what does it take to fix that? Because our community can't have now twice as many fire stations. But what is that fix? So yeah, I think there are definitely things that we can get at. I don't know how much that data will tell us, but again, the goal is what that data team is doing. They're writing it down, they're putting it into a script, they're identifying those data sources. So as we experience more in our region, pull that data and ideally see where we're turning trends to. But yeah, post-crash care is one of the 5 components of the safe system approach. That's what we're embracing in this solution, and that is a big part of it. It's probably one of the least measured too. So yeah, I agree.
I think a piece of data that, I would like, and I don't know if this is asking too much, but it should come up in the past 2 meetings, is that there could be some sort of a little sheet that tells us the differences in the laws between Nebraska and Iowa.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I think that.
That for use of safety and traffic, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that's not directly on the item. Yeah, no, that's a great recommendation.
And that kind of drives our experience too.
It does.
Our lives.
Yeah. Some of the examples that they give for safe system, or the safe streets and roads for all is start on low cost countermeasures, low cost projects that look the same everywhere. So for a driver experiencing something, when you cross the jurisdiction boundary, it doesn't look different, or it's a, you know, do you like the rapid repeating flashing beacon, or do you like the pedestrian hybrid beacon that's up and so, you know, driven down Washington Street in Papillion, you come up on that thing, you'll see people respond differently if they haven't done it and they don't know, can I go now or not? Well, reason for having that is to not make people stop at a red light when there's nobody in the crosswalk. But if the driver doesn't know what to do,
Right.
and now you stack up traffic, now you have somebody in the back doing something erratic. So it's really, you know, our goal is to learn from each community, and some communities might not want things. I mean, we know we're gonna talk roundabouts, we're gonna show all the numbers, and we're gonna walk into communities and recognize that either public opinion or local leadership, that may be a challenge. And so a roundabout isn't the only solution by any means, and it may not be the thing to fix the problem. So, but yeah, that's a good question, Tim, about the data needs. To be fair, they showed that up there. One of our biggest challenges with doing the study right now is data availability or consistency or accuracy. And that's not intentional by any one group. Managing data is expensive. realizing the importance of it is, and especially when we cross jurisdiction boundaries, people do it differently, but if there's something we need in the future to do this analysis better, it is better data. And more of it.
One area that's, I think has a lot of value that, it'd be great if you guys looked more into, and this is something that I'm aware of, that I just don't have time to do it, is looking at the demographics, especially at the vulnerable road users of where they live, because there's a significant unhoused connection. I mean, every year there's at least 2 people that are unhoused that are either killed while biking or just walking. And that's pretty consistent, and I'm sure it'll show up in Iowa or anywhere east of the river. So if that could be specifically looked into, I think that'd be helpful as far as coming up with recommendations to address that.
Yeah, thank you. Each state in their vulnerable road user safety assessment, in the vulnerable road user safety assessment, they were required to do some kind of disadvantage or socioeconomic comparison. Each state did it a little differently, and I think it fits each state's characteristics. In Nebraska, they used the CDC's Center for Disease Control Social Vulnerability Index, and so that showed statistically significant, characteristics where we're just like you say that regions which are disadvantaged socioeconomically or race and ethnicity definitely showed larger numbers of crashes and more disproportionate, more fatal outcomes. They'll be like our data team will be using those tools in our analysis for our region. But yeah, for the unhoused, I'm not quite sure what data set this would potentially lend to help answer that question. And I think some of that we'll be talking to each individual community as well. So because that probably has a geographic.
Did you say how long the survey's open?
So yeah, I think until it loses value. So it's definitely intended to last through the at least the portion where it's supporting the study work. It's not a 2-week or 3-week and done. So, yeah.
There can be anything, we kind of mentioned a few things with, like actual vehicle design, so I know we broke it, passenger vehicles, trucks, all that, but, maybe looking at, do newer vehicles with whatever general safety features do better, whereas, I don't know how much info you can pull, if you have like a VIN number or whatever, what they're doing in the reports, but I'd be curious to see.
Yeah, we have that data. I didn't present it here, but I was, so how the states reported is vehicles, under 10 years, 10 to 20 and 20 plus. In under 10 years, it's about, so it'd be like 20% less likely to result in a fatal or serious injury crash if you have a vehicle under 10 years compared to 10 plus. But it's kind of funny, ironically, though, 10 to 20 years is less safe than 20 plus. So like, I don't know how useful it is. We know that newer is definitely better, but apparently something happened, where vehicles are safer in the 90s than they are in the 2000s. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or 2000, 2010.
And to your point, there are definitely initiatives that are currently passed, things that NHTSA is looking to incorporate, anything from that blind side detection to, a lot of vehicles now will, instead of just look ahead for a vehicle, it may even stop for pedestrians. So there's a whole range of those technologies and in which cars are putting them in. But yeah, I think that would be good to pull out at least what we can. We do have the ability to do a couple deep dives, some statistical analysis. So maybe it's not something that we can measure or report here, but we could look at and kind of pull the thread on. Safer vehicles is one of the 5 components of the safe system approach. So yes, if we can identify a way, I think we're going to pull out and we're going to see some disproportionate outcomes from different classes of vehicles, whether or not we can get to the point to say it's a particular make or model or what they have as far as technology or not, may be a challenge.
It's also important to kind of look into the actual weight of the vehicle as well, looking at that mass as a major contributor to the end result of the crash with KSI.
Do we have any assessments of like infrastructure, like sidewalks and just roadway conditions and all that?
We do. Okay, that was definitely one of the items that was listed there.
Okay,
And you kind of, yeah, we have the whole range here. Yeah, so this is a challenge, whether or
Okay.
not the sidewalk exists or not, is one hard thing to measure, then it's that quality of the sidewalk, it's the physical characteristics, the width, and how it interacts with the roadway. I would say we don't have a lot of that data. Maybe initially it will be presence of a sidewalk or not that we can start looking at, but there are some really cool initiatives. Douglas County GIS is using some artificial intelligence, some machine learning to go and measure stuff from cameras. So while we may not have it now, I think there are other things that are in place. Yeah, we know that that's one of our data needs for sure.
Oh, one other thought, it might be helpful to kind of, hone in more on the vulnerable road user. Exactly the location of where they were hit, and I'm not saying like in the street or, because there's a lot of times where in the report, it just said. I did specifically calling out in the data, it's like they were on a sidewalk and a car actually hit them on the sidewalk, because that happens frequently, but that's not exactly that detail. It doesn't frequently make it in the report, or isn't, at least isn't documented in a lot of these studies.
Okay. Yeah, so,
On the data table, it's probably in the long form and
Yeah.
not
Yeah,
yeah,
the translation on the table.
exactly, yeah.
got it. Yeah, so right now, that would be a limitation of our study, where we're not looking into the long form of the crash reports. We're taking what's provided by the DOTs.
I've got a question if I could ask. You've given several scenarios where the results were either a crash, fatality, or major injury. Is there a way to drill down to census tract to see what's causing these incidents and where? And by that, I'm thinking, if it was DUI, if it's speed, driving the wrong way. I mean, can you drill down that far to get a little bit more specific? Because communities are different and the causes may be different as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. The answer to your question is yes. I think so. Yeah, we'll take that back to the data support team. I think that the hard part is how do we hone on those characteristics that we want to look at the most, but underlying each of these crash locations or segments are all those things that you spoke to. It's just a matter of being able to filter it out and present it, but we definitely get your point.
Okay.
So yes,
I'm sorry. What I'm thinking of is for, if this is to create a marketing campaign, I'm trying to think of if a lot of the crashes are happening around, for instance, a school or childcare or something of that nature, to where then the marketing campaign can go back to preventing these accidents so that we can have our children grow up and live, thriving lives and whatnot. So I'm just trying to think of the end result of what this all could mean in terms of trying to improve the. I'm going to say, is there a way to correlate the insurance premium decreasing because the driving conditions of the community has improved? Because we've seen where insurance can be extremely high in certain communities when it comes to trying to insure a vehicle. And that's it.
I think the insurance, the relationship of crashes, first of all, the school zone one I'll talk to first. Our firm helped out with the Kansas statewide vulnerable road user assessment, and we found out that the vast majority of VRU crashes happened across the state of Kansas, happened within I think it was a half-mile radius of a school, right? At first you think like, well, every town's got a school, but then that's a significant thing. It's like, holy cow, I think it was above 80%. And so looking at that, and we're in a city, so maybe our radius is much smaller, like 4 blocks, we look at what are the characteristics of those crashes around our schools. And seeing what that relationship is, and how, like you said, building a campaign around that. Okay, what do we need to do around schools? That's definitely a focused area in many of these studies, and I imagine this one too.
Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no.
And that will be, so again, the data team, to get us to the point we are now, have given us this. Nebraska's vulnerable road user did just that they looked at schools, places of worship, transit stops, transit locations. Now, not digging too deep into it, definitely, we're talking about disproportionate, the numbers there, both in numbers of crashes and the outcomes of those crashes did feature. So they'll be performing that analysis on our study area as well.
And then your second point about vehicle registration and can you just remind me of the second question?
Insurance premiums.
Insurance premium. Yeah, that's right. I know that one's a hard one to get at, because in our crash, obviously, not obviously, but our crash data, we don't have necessarily what was going on with the vehicle. But that being said, we can draw conclusions with, especially like our CDC data and our transportation disadvantaged areas, socioeconomic. If we look at a census tract, we know what the average incomes are in that area, vehicle registration data. We can make conclusions and relationships based on that. That would maybe draw those kinds of correlations. But diving into really particulars, I think it's quite tough though on that.
If there's not data on premiums, is there data when there's a crash? Do you put whether they're insured or uninsured? Is that, so I mean, that would be kind of interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is great. I'm getting a whole list of stuff, so.
Thank you, everybody, for coming all the way out here to West Omaha to do this. I know a couple folks kind of came in. Can you please make sure you get your contact details down? We've got a list somewhere.
I put it on the back.
Perfect, perfect.
It's the sign-in sheet.
So, outside of this meeting, if there are things that come up and you want to let us know about it or ask a question, safestreets@mapacog.org is the way to get to us. You should have all that in your calendar invites for the things that are coming out. We'll definitely look to get invites out to you as we prepare for that next meeting. But yeah, anything that you have for us, questions, thoughts, whatever, have to take.
Will you let us know about all do we get to know about the engagement things that were up there, like? 10
Yeah,
of these or
absolutely.
One of these?
Yeah, it's a great
Will we get
question.
to know about those?
We haven't identified exactly what the means of sharing that's gonna be, but yeah, that will be, yes, we will make sure that distribution and not knowing what it's gonna look like, I won't offer what it should be yet.
Yeah, as of right now, I think we've got bookings for, I want to say Carter Lake Days. Bayless Music in the Park in Council Bluffs, and then Crescent, I believe, is a farmer's market at the end of August. So those are the three that we've kind of booked and have on the calendar solidified that we're definitely going to do. We're looking at events in Gretna, we're looking at events in Bellevue, Papillion, Westo. I think Valley has some stuff
Valley
going
Days.
on. Yeah, Valley Days is coming up, great, so. So we're kind of sending out all the feelers and starting to book things for those. We have capacity to do about 7 of those, or 10, sorry, of those pop-up events between now and I guess the end of this year. And we're probably going to focus most of those in the summer and fall, so that's when events are running. And we'll try to get that information out as soon as it becomes available.
All right, great. Any last thoughts from the group, requests?
I know I came in late, so you may have covered this, but, so are there existing plans for priorities, that you've identified? Where you, intend to provide some intervention or corrections because of all of the data that you found? There's problem areas here, so what's the status of, things that are going to happen?
So early for us, and I guess I should have mentioned too, our comprehensive safety action plan is a joint application of the city of Omaha. The city of Omaha has completed their Vision Zero action plan. I turned it to you, Jeff, if there's anything in particular you have. We're still in the exploratory phases, so we've not identified problems yet, much less solutions for our planning.
And what the plan is ultimately going to be a list of priority areas and a list of strategies that can be implemented. We as MAPA don't actually have jurisdiction over any of the roadways or anything like that, but we might be able to use our connections resources to do maybe like an educational outreach effort. But those kinds of strategies will come out of this plan, and hopefully like by spring of next year, once the plan is together. The plan itself is mostly just a reference document and kind of a guiding principle plan that we can then use for future implementation efforts.
And you have a target date for that plan completion?
Yes, it's
April of 2025, we have the draft out in January. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I'll move that out of the way.
Yep, so and the timeline for this, the funding source that provided us the ability to do planning, that funding source will come open again, and that would kind of be our first window to apply for implementation funds for physical things that are produced, or pilot projects. There's opportunity for demonstration funding. There's funding to get more data if that's what we need, and there's funding to do more planning if that's what we identified as required as well. So lots of opportunities, but we have to have a plan first to start into a lot of those, to start applying for many of those others.
And just talking about these implementation and further studies, City of Omaha was awarded one for Ames, the entirety, a planning grant for Ames. And the City of Council Bluffs applied for additional funding to look at pilot projects along Second Avenue, the First Avenue corridor, sorry. So there's stuff that we could do. Let us know how we can help. Let us know what we're missing, who's missing amongst us in this group. Just because your individual community may not have a representation in our high injury network, safety is everyone's concern. So that's the way we're looking at it, right? So help us out, help spread the word, more to come.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. And good talk.
40 minutes next.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so like Jim mentioned, if you haven't signed in yet, there's a very scratchy sign-in sheet on the back counter there. If you can fill that in, that'd be very helpful. Thank you.